Hey guys, welcome back to the Powerlifters Programming Podcast. A very special guest today. We got Thomas Lilley. So for those of you that don't know, this is Colton Engelbrecht's coach. He coaches many other lifters other than Colton, but Colton's a great one to name considering he is the strongest man to ever live. So pretty cool title coaching him. That being said, let's just get right into it. You have gotten pretty popular for your lower volume training approach. There are definitely a decent amount of coaches that have a similar style to you, but there's also quite a few that have maybe a higher frequency, higher volume, lower intensity style. Do you want to just give like a brief outline? I know you've done something like this in your like Thomas solo sessions before, just kind of what your programming might look like as opposed to other coaches, and then we can get more into the specifics.
Yeah, sure, man. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm big on like language and definitions. So I'm gonna say I don't know if I've gotten popular because of my training style as much as just experience in the industry and years of grinding away and coaching a lot of really strong lifters
And results.
But I think I think the attention on that is me being a little bit more vocal about it in more recent times. And a big part of that is just like programming in powerlifting is very cyclical. I've been involved in powerlifting in some capacity for about 20 years. I've been coaching for just over 13 years. And I got popular because of the volume of work and coaching that I've done. So like individually, I've coached well over 1,000 people over the last 13 years. I've coached at a very high level, mainly in Australia, but definitely outside of Australia. And just in recent times, obviously, the caliber of lifter that I'm working with is getting greater and greater. And this expands across all federations, all different kinds and creeds of lifters. I don't know if there's many people in Australia that have taken as many people to the IPF international stage as I have. So like to dispel any myths that I'm the guy that coaches people on PEDs, that's just not true. I'd say a big majority of the lifters that I've worked with have not been on PEDs and have competed in the IPF. But anyway, in terms of the actual programming style, it's funny that the term applied to it is low volume, because for me it's adequate volume. I look at the kind of volumes and frequencies that people are doing as relatively high, as commonplace in the industry right now, and it's kind of we're just in that swing at the moment. So you go back again like 15-20 years ago, the two big styles were like Russian style, which was very much Shaco templates, and more the conjugate West Side style. Then it kind of shifted gears and went towards more of a linear periodization, which was based off the teachings of people like Philippi and Ed Cohen and all that sort of stuff. And then Chad Wesley Smith made that really popular, and that was the school of thought that I came from. So I went from very high frequency, high volume to high volume linear periodization. And over time, it's just like you focus on the results, you focus on the data that you gain from those results, you pay attention to what the science is doing, and that's why I've arrived where I am right now. Is that a good enough overview?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think volume is like whatever anyone is doing, that's just volume, and anything above that is high volume, anything below is low volume.
Yeah.
Always find someone doing more or less than you. In your Thomas solo sessions, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure it varies, but just for the audience, you said maybe each exercise, squat, bench, deadlift, might be about 1 time a week, 2 to 3 sets on those, and then you really like to focus on some more like quote unquote bodybuilder type accessories. You're pushing those closer to failure, maybe like a leg press, a chest press, pec deck, that sort of thing. Does that sound approximately right?
Yeah, I would say that the current programming style that I'm using is heavily influenced by modern hypertrophy science. So if you look at what bodybuilders are doing, my programming echoes a lot of that these days, I would say. Most of the lifters that I work with are doing, like you said, one exposure to squat, bench, deadlift as a direct competition lift. There's secondary exposures to patterns around that. So like a lifter doing a squat will also have some sort of machine squat, whether it's a hack squat, a leg press, a Rogers squat, whatever it may be. A person doing a competition style deadlift will also have somewhere else in the week a hinge of some sort, like an RDL, stiff leg deadlift, a good morning. And pressing, there'll be a competition bench press, and either a bench press variation or a pressing variation, like a chest press machine of some sort. So like there's exposure to the movement patterns But I mean, programming choices really comes down to your individual philosophy and what you're trying to achieve. I need to acknowledge my bias here, which is my bias here these days. So for those who don't know me, I own a brand called Zero, and Zero is not just online coaching and programming. We're a gym as well. So I have 8 gyms across 3 countries with several more opening soon. We have like 30 coaches on the team. And so when I talk about my programming style, I'm talking through the lens of my bias with the people that I currently work with. And the people that I currently work with are kind of top tier powerlifters. And so if I was applying my programming philosophy to someone who was brand new, who was learning how to lift, my programming would probably look a little bit more different. Not a huge degree different, but it might have a little bit more exposure to the competition movements, for example. So just recognize my bias when I'm talking about my programming style. However, I'd say to the average powerlifter that's got semi-experience, my style is going to be pretty consistent.
Yeah, that's actually a really good segue. How I know you do have experience coaching lower level athletes as well, even if you have a huge influx of very high level athletes that you coach now, just as you've gotten so popular and had good results. But how would you say that their training changes? Do you find lower level versus higher level athletes, someone needs more volume, less volume, they need more sets on the SBD compared to accessory work? Or could you kind of break down a little bit about your system and how you change things?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the degree of change is going to be relatively small. It's just about understanding why you're changing what you're changing. And ultimately, it comes down to experience level. So I prefer not to look at differences between, say, PEDs and no PEDs, or male and female. It's even equipment differences. It's more about experience level, because the more experienced you are, the more fatigue you will generate just by virtue of the fact that you can express your strength more efficiently. And so, like, giving someone like Colton 5 sets of squats or 8 sets of squats through the week doesn't make as much sense as giving someone who's brand new 8 sets of squats through the week, because Colton can train to a very high intensity relative to his strength, whereas the inexperienced person can't really approach that intensity very well, because they're limited by their capacity to express that strength because their skill is much lower. This is why when you're coaching someone who's relatively new, on paper they might have a max, or sorry, in real life they might have a max that's 100 kilo deadlift, but they can do like 90 kilos plus for 5 or 6 reps. That doesn't make sense until you realize that they're not limited by their absolute strength, they're limited by their ability to express it. So the programming style will change based on the experience level, to where someone with less experience can tolerate a little bit more exposure, and to some degree requires a bit more exposure. The really hard thing when it comes to actually applying that in real life is that you don't see a defined point where the experience changes. And I think this is where a lot of coaches go wrong, is that they treat everyone kind of the same, and they keep doing things that got results initially, even when they stop getting results, because they're too scared or don't understand what's going on. So it's like benching 4 times a week got this person from 140 to 170. Now they're benching 170 and they're stuck, and they've been stuck for 6 months. And instead of being like, okay, the program's not working anymore, let's change it, they'll just reverse engineer reasons for why it's not working. They'll just say, oh no, it's because this person's wrists started hurting, or their elbows got sore, or this changed in their life. It's like, maybe those things happened because they were benching 4 times a week. You have to be willing to consistently look at your own methodology objectively. And so when you're applying programming styles and people stop making progress, you have to be willing to accept maybe this person has changed experience level. Maybe what was working by accident, or there's more to it that we need to understand in order to continue to allow this person progress. And most of the time the answer is do less, not do more.
Yeah, I've found the exact same thing in my own training and with athletes. I think we've all had that period. If you're like really into this, when you first start lifting, you maybe don't have good technique, and you're like, sounds like a great idea to deadlift every day. And you might make progress for a little bit because your technique gets like way, way, way better, and you don't really get that fatigued. but like give that a couple of weeks and you're probably not going to be pulling 400 kilos. Like the gains are going to slow down substantially. And then in my own experience, as I've gotten stronger, I just get a little bit more beat up and I have to pull back a little bit, allow that extra recovery, and keep seeing some progress. That's been a big trend with myself. So we've kind of talked about your volumes and your frequencies. Would you mind covering maybe the RPEs a little bit? Because something I've noticed is obviously if you're doing a higher intensity, you're gonna have to pull back on volume and vice versa. But with like Colton Engelbrecht in particular, it seems like he's just going like RPE 9 every week. But then maybe you've got an athlete like Dan Griggs that is doing more submaximal stuff, or maybe that's just what they're posting. But could you talk a little about like your RPE preferences, maybe how that varies between those two lifters?
Yeah, sure. So I don't really program using RPE very much. I speak more in the language of RIR, and I mean that's splitting hairs really at the end of the day. I've just never been an RPE guy. I'm a fixed numbers guy. I use that language very specifically. So you could call it percentage-based training, but the question you have to ask is the percentage of what? It's not just you plug in the number that is the 1 rep max and then spit out some other numbers as a result of it. There's a lot more thought that goes into it, just like with RPE. And the reality is that every lift you do has an RPE. You rate it. You say that was easy, that was hard, whatever it is. And every lift you do is a percentage of something. So you can't do one without the other. In terms of intensities, I'm a big believer in high intensity. Like the intensity is what drives the adaptations. And this comes back to people need to understand what we are actually trying to achieve with strength training. Like it's all well and good to say, yeah, do this amount of sets and reps and intensity, but what's changing in the human body that actually makes somebody stronger? If we can understand that, we can create more justification in our programming, right? And so the primary adaptations that we're making are going to be hypertrophy and skill, like just what am I trying to say? Neuromuscular connection, neuromuscular adaptations. So it's the skill component in terms of the neurology and the hypertrophy adaptation. And really, it's the hypertrophy adaptation more than anything. And so when you look at hypertrophy training, it's like, well, you need to train to a reasonably high intensity. You need to train in close proximity to failure. And there's numerous benefits that come with this, right? So when you point out the difference between Colton and Danny, I would say a couple of things that just pop up is the bias of whatever people post. And of course, you've just got the differences in lifter expression, I guess. Some lifters are slow and some lifters are fast. Like Colton's lifts aren't particularly explosive. Or Danny's an extremely explosive person. And I'm sure you've seen this as a coach and maybe in your own lifting. The more explosive the person, the harder it is to see the point at which they're going to fail. So like I see a lot of the videos that Danny will send of me where maybe he's failed a rep and the rep before he fails looks lightning fast. Like there's no prediction. So when you see his stuff online, you're like, oh, that looked like a relatively easy RPE. To him, it might be the same relative to RPE to what Colton's doing. So I would say most of the sets that I prescribe, the ideal intensity is 2 RIR or less.
Okay, yeah.
Doesn't make a great deal of sense to be training any lower intensity than that. Like if you think about, okay, let's bench 3 times a week. One of the benches is high intensity, one is like a tempo variation, and the other one is just quote unquote volume. You're just doing 5 by 5 at like 70%. It's like, what is that 5 by 5 at 70% doing? Well, you're not really getting a skill component, because skill is relative to load. Skill needs intensity if we're talking about powerlifting, because the skill is lifting really fucking heavy for 1 rep. It's not lifting light. That's why we don't change someone's technique with the empty bar. We have to put load on the bar, but the load has to be relatively high intensity. So it's not driving any hypertrophy adaptations. It's literally just a waste of time. It's literally just fluff. Now, I shouldn't say it that harshly, because if you can find other justification, if it ticks a mental box for the lifter to where they feel better about their training, that's actually a relevant point. If they like doing it and it's fun, that's a relevant point. But if we're talking about it from a purely adaptation perspective, it's kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, I've had the same thoughts. If you just kind of zoom out from specific powerlifting knowledge and just look, what are we trying to achieve here? If it was just all about volume and percentages on the bar didn't matter at all. Like marathon runners would have huge legs. But like, we have to go heavy, and we have to go at least pretty close to failure. Even if you look at research, that can be pretty true. If you're doing 50% for some work and it's super far from failure, especially, you're probably not accomplishing a whole lot. And there are definitely, systems. Shaco has rep work with 50%, and you can do a bunch of different systems, and a good coach can work with all of them and get an athlete stronger. But there's got to be a general training philosophy that's a little bit better than the 50% for reps when you just kind of zoom out and look at it. And I think you do a really good job of encapsulating that in your system for sure.
Yeah, what people really need to do when you're programming and developing your system, or even looking at other people's systems, is to be willing to be like, okay, something about this is working, because it's pretty easy to get close to the mark with programming. Like, you can write a shit program that ticks some boxes and get some sort of a result out of it. But you have to be willing to consistently look at it and refine it and be like, what is working and what is potentially a waste of time? And can I then test for this and continue to refine and to continue and improve, but go back to the drawing board, whatever. And what you'll find in doing that is there's a lot of programs out there that have a lot of good stuff and a lot of fluffy stuff. My job, like the way I see my position in all of this as a coach for my lifters, my job is to get the best result as quick as possible. And when I look at a lifter, so for context, I generally break training up into 5-week blocks. Let's call a year then 10 blocks. If you have 2 peaks in that year, that's 2 blocks. There's 10 weeks gone. There's only 8 blocks of training in a year. That's not a lot of time. And so like, return on investment is extremely important. And everyone kind of knows and appreciates that the more experience you get, the harder those adaptations are to make, the slower progress is. So I want to get my lifters results despite the level of experience that they're in. And I don't want to waste any of their time, because we all have a finite amount of time doing this. And it's just been a game of years and years and years of refining, applying, refining, and applying. And you get case studies like Colton, who's added like 260 kilos to his total in the last couple of years. You can't deny that the person is experienced. You can't deny that they're a high level. And that rate of improvement is crazy. Like, it's really good. And to me, that's sort of proof of concept. But then people will say, well, he's a genetic outlier, or he's elite. You could do anything with elite people and that'll work. That's so wrong. Like, it's the complete opposite. The more elite and experienced person is, the more precise things have to be. And so while it's great to look at that result with Colton, I've kind of got that consistent track record of results across experience levels, age levels, tested or untested status, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying that my method is perfect or the best. It's the best that I know for me, but there's certainly other people taking different approaches that fundamentally tick the box of principles and drive consistent results as well. And that's ultimately what you have to understand. It comes back to principles, not some magical method.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And what you were saying about just, they have elite genetics, anything works. I think if that were true, every athlete would be at Colton's level. There'd be like 100 of them. There's a lot of genetics, but there's a gap there for some reason. It's probably because of a lot of other things that go into it, besides his obviously good genetics. But circling back a little bit more, we were talking about, Dan versus Colton, and not that specific example, but obviously athletes do have different recovery needs. So just to clarify, it sounds like you like the 2 RIR-ish range, and then I guess what you'd be left with is, if an athlete's recovering a little bit less or more, is you just adjust the total set count throughout the week.
Yes and no, right? So like, this is the complication with programming. This is why I don't particularly like week-to-week programming. Like we don't, things shouldn't fluctuate so much on a week-to-week basis that requires enormous changes week to week. So the way I look at things is more like, okay, well, what you can do in one lift in one set is one thing. Can you do that across multiple sets? Can you then add a whole bunch of accessories after that? Can you then do that with another session and another session and another session across the week? And then can you do that week after week after week? So it's not just as simple as strip one set away here or there and it changes the entire fatigue equation throughout the block, right? And so again, in terms of refining programming over time, I'm far more preferable to I'm far more preferable to applying an entire block across, four weeks, with the fifth week being a deload, and then knowing how to dial up and down the overall intensity across that block to create better outcomes, block after block after block. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, instead of micro focusing on 1 week and changing things week to week with week, I'm doing the same thing but across a block. And once you understand your system so in depth, you're far better placed to know exactly what to change across that. Because I guess the beginning of your question being that different lifters have different recovery needs, it's kind of a loaded question. I think we over individualize too much and think that everyone's a special snowflake and everything is so different to other people. What you'll find is there are far more similarities and consistencies across the human population than there are differences. And I play far more into that side of the equation than treating everything individually. And so with that, you sort of work out very quickly that people fit particular archetypes, and you can figure out that archetype immediately and then slot them into whatever boxes. And most people do this organically without taking into consideration that they actually do it. As in, like, if I gave you a lifter and I'm like, write this guy a strength block, and then I gave you 9 other lifters and said, write them strength blocks. Even if you're on the camp of like everything has to be individual, I'm going to start with a blank sheet of paper, all 10 strength blocks are going to look pretty much exactly the same, because in your head you have a framework of what a strength block looks like. And so all I'm doing is just like being very explicit about that, I guess. That was a really long-winded answer for a very simple question.
No, that was great. The more long-winded it is, a lot of times people are just getting more knowledge out of it. So I think that was great. Another key aspect, I guess, of your training I'd like to dial in a bit that you already mentioned was the deloads. So is it pretty common you're doing 5-week blocks and you deload either week 1 or week 5 in every block, just as a prerequisite question?
Yes. Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, great. So why have you decided to go with kind of a harder deload model instead of maybe a wave loading model? And could you describe a little bit? And if that is like a inaccurate assumption, feel free to say what you do instead.
You mean like a reactive rather than a proactive? A proactive rather than a reactive deload?
I guess yes.
Or you mean like the wave model in terms of like a bunch of easy weeks and then some hard weeks?
Yeah, exactly that.
So like, I mean, you could say that there is wave loading as part of this. Like the RIR in week 1, for example, should be about 2, and then by week 4 should be about 1. And so like the intensity does increase across the block for sure. And in terms of why I would then go with that model and chuck a deload in at the end, again, it's really about that consistency and predictability. I want to make the lifter fit into the block rather than reshape the block to fit the lifter. And I mean, as offensive as it sounds in this day and age for powerlifting, it's literally how training works in every other context ever. I'm not a big fan of the idea of reactive deloads, as in just deloading when you feel like you need a deload. The reason being is that it would be very easy to then lose a lot of weeks. So like, let's say I'm coaching you, you go through week 5 and you're like, look, I'm still feeling pretty good. You go into week 6, you start failing a bunch of lifts and you're like, I think I need a deload. But I'm not sure. I'm going to try week 7. So you go into week 7, you're like, I definitely need a deload. Let's make this a deload. It's like, we've wasted 2 weeks. Extrapolate that out over a year. If that's happening 5 times in the year, you've lost a fifth of the year of solid training. And again, for me, it's all about return on investment. I want the highest quality of training all the time. And so creating a consistable and predictable model serves me well. And then again, in terms of wave loading, you run the risk of the beginning of the wave essentially being a waste of time as well. Like, we want high intensity as much as we can, and to maintain the highest intensity and highest quality of training possible as much as we can. So I'm not shitting on wave loading by any means, but you just have to be careful that the bottom of your wave is not so slim that it's just a waste of time, and then you're effectively only getting 3 quality weeks out of every 6.
Yeah, I've had very similar thoughts before. Like to kind of conceptualize it, like you can get progress within this range and you progress, it slowly gets narrower. If you're doing a crazy 6-week wave load. The very beginning might be on this side. The very end might be on this side. And that's a lot of wasted training. Kind of like before you were touching on your week to week. Your specific week doesn't matter that much, but it's going to look fairly similar over the weeks. And if you're doing way different stuff in week 1 versus week 3 versus week 6, you're probably missing the mark some of those weeks, unless you're super beginning to training and anything works, I guess. But
Sure.
yeah, I totally agree there. You're a coach that I've kind of had on a lot of coaches at first that I have differing views then. And so you're the first coach that I'm going through. I'm like, I kind of agree with like everything this guy's saying.
Yeah, the modern powerlifting coaching and programming world is kind of interesting, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean it in the purest sense of like we are just essentially swinging back the pendulum to where it was when we realized it wasn't working as well. The hard thing is the red herring results, right? So you get someone with an ultra high frequency, ultra high volume sort of program that makes rapid progress. That happens for a lot of people. And there are effective and positive attributes to that high frequency, high volume model. And I don't want to speak like I'm just an observer. You know, I used to do this routinely with my lifters, with myself. I at one stage did fucking 8 bench sessions a week, you know, like 2 double sessions through the week and then a bunch of single sessions. I know what it's like to do high frequency and high volume. It's more just that extrapolation over time and what that looks like over time and how you manage it over time. That only can come with experimentation and experience. And so what you see with a lot of this high frequency, high volume training styles is a very, very, very short lifespan in powerlifting. And in powerlifting, the best powerlifters in the world are the ones that tend to stick around the longest. And so while I'm not necessarily demonizing the high frequency, high volume style training, you just have to be realistic about the sustainability, but the viability of it as well. Like there's a lot of people that will preach this style of training that you then go and look on their open powerlifting. They're meant to be like the best of the best lifter or whatever, or they're coaching the best of the best lifters. And we get blinded by the number. So like if someone has a reasonably high lift in a particular category, a massive deadlift, you just always look at them as that person's an amazing deadlifter. To me, an amazing lifter is a person that consistently makes progress. So if they like deadlifted whatever 380 2 years ago and they still deadlift 380, are they a great deadlifter, or are they a strong deadlifter? Now, a great deadlifter would continue to make progress. And I think this is the difficult thing, is that people get blinded by strength, by results, by eliteness, that they get less objective about what's actually going on.
Yeah, open powerlifting tells all.
Yeah, don't look at mine because I don't claim to be a lifter. I'm a coach. Leave me alone.
Okay.
Look at my lifters.
Understandable. Yeah, Agata, I'm sure you know Agata Shitko. She does the SPD 7 times a week, and they have a system and it's working for her. So I wouldn't, she's doing her thing. Totally keep going for it. But little known fact, I was the original SPD 7 times a week person. I was pushing it, like I was doing sets to failure on like squat, bench, and deadlift every day, just grinding it out. Made progress for about a week. I got my first 500-pound deadlift on that, and then just never hit PRs again for about another year while I ran it. Changed to a lower volume approach and just exploded since then. So there's definitely some returns for the majority athletes where that stuff just isn't going to work anymore. I did just have. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say on the 7 days SPD, because obviously this is coming up a lot these days. It's kind of like it's working until it stops working. Just like when we all started going to the gym, we maxed out every week until it stops working. Eventually it has to stop, and we have to be able to say what was working, why did it work for that period of time, what aspects of that can I take and continue to use, and why did it stop working. And a lot of the times in this higher volume, higher frequency style training, the things that are working are the high intensity aspects. The things that are not working are the lower intensity aspects that are taking away from the entire training equation, which might be more hypertrophy training, more specific accessories to a high intensity that are actually feeding into improving technique. And for those who listen here, a lot of my programming philosophy is based on technique. Like my coaching style is very technical. I'm a big believer in technique trumps everything. Technique is the most important thing, which kind of goes against the grain of more modern powerlifting coaching as well, which is a lot more of the like self-organizing technique and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, you have to understand what's working and what's not working. And I would be willing to fall on my sword right now to say that the 7 days SBD is going to run its course very quickly, either in the sense of injury or just a complete stalling and lack of progress. Like it is going to run out of it. And the other thing is, this goes with anything in life, right? Which is if the unconventional was the best, then the unconventional would be the norm. If that was the best method of training, we would have figured it out by now, and everyone would be doing it. Just like when somebody naturally goes, oh, this semi-sumo stance, halfway between sumo and halfway between conventional, this is working. It's like, if that was the answer, everyone would do that. The reason semi-sumo doesn't work is because it doesn't give you the best of both worlds. It gives you the worst of both worlds. People just end up there because they suck at both sumo and conventional. They find some grace halfway between, but it's ultimately a very limiting position. Anyway.
No, great explanation. But I just had one more quick question on deloads, just kind of something that people can listen to this and implement into their own training. I know it probably varies a bit depending on each athlete, but could you give kind of just a general guideline you'd start off an athlete with their deload? For instance, maybe they're like, normally they're doing 3 sets. Let's just do 1 set of 8 with 60% and keep your accessory volume the same.
Yeah, so I used to be a big believer in like a pretty harsh reduction in volume and intensity across the deload. Like we call week 4 ham week. You just go ham, you go nuts and push a bit harder, create more fatigue knowing that you've got that deload week coming. I don't believe that in that as much anymore. And again, probably a little bit more influenced by the modern hypertrophy sort of style of stuff, which is to say that, catabolism happens pretty quickly. And it's not extreme catabolism, but we want to keep momentum rolling. So I prefer to keep the intensity across the board with both the main lift and accessories reasonably high. And when I say high, I don't mean super high, but I mean like in that 2 to 3 RIR range, and just decrease the actual number of sets. So if I'm getting most lifters, I'm giving 2 sets of most accessories. So in the deload week, it might be 1. If I'm giving 2 to 3, maybe even 4 or 5 sets of SBD, it's going to be down to 1 or 2 tops. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect explanation. Could we kind of segue that into peaking? So it sounds like you have your own blocks for peaking. In general, what does that kind of look like with set counts, accessories, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, again, I'm a big believer in principles. So you have to come back down to what's actually happening in a peak. You're not getting any bigger. You're not getting any stronger. Peaking is literally just practice. So it's about hitting high intensity doubles and singles across the board. You want to maintain muscle mass, because you lose muscle mass, you lose strength. So there needs to be accessory work throughout the peak at a reasonably high intensity, but you're also balancing fatigue and you're balancing risk. The other really key important principle that people sometimes don't recognize enough is the actual duration of the peak. Like, how long does it take to peak? Because people say, oh, I'm entering into my peaking block now, I'm 12 weeks out of competition. It's like, well, you're not. You're calling the entire thing a peaking block, but the actual peak happens in the last like 2 or 3 weeks. It's very short-lived, right? So very, very, very low volume, like 1 to 2 sets, normally cutting away some of the higher risk accessories. Like if you've got one of these fucking freaks and they're feeling good because they're in a peak and their fatigue isn't super high because they're just doing singles and doubles, it's very tempting for these lifters to be like, I wonder what I can press overhead. I wonder what my max dumbbell press is. I feel really good. And when you're working with untested lifters and you throw PEDs in the mix and you're feeling like fucking Superman or Superwoman, it's like, yeah, let's give this a crack. No, let's not. So it's a bit of a balancing act. Coaching's interesting because you've got the reality of coaching as a whole, but then you've got online versus in person. And online, you're crafting a message through your program that you have to build in some sort of contingencies and direction. You have to take that kind of thought. Like if I'm programming leg press at 1 RIR during a peak, do I really want someone to do a true 1 RIR leg press? Like, the intensity and the kind of weight that these freaks are going to use actually becomes risky. You have to go back to principles, what actually matters, maintaining muscle, taking the joints through healthy range, keeping things moving nicely, but above all else, really practicing the skill of lifting heavy.
Yeah, you'd feel pretty dumb if you had an athlete a week out, max out the leg press and tear their quad. That would be a pretty bad feeling. So it makes a lot of sense there. You touched on the PED topic a little bit. So overall, it kind of sounds like, and feel free to clarify, sounds like your training for athletes on PEDs is going to be pretty darn similar to athletes not on PEDs, maybe a little bit more cautious of injuries.
Yeah, I would say essentially exactly the same. But of course, the process aspect is going to have some differences. But I mean, like, look at it like this. Like, if you have somebody who introduces PEDs or introduces a level of PEDs, whether it's a new substance or a new dose or whatever, there's going to be a change in strength expression that potentially happens. You know, they're going to get a little bit stronger, a little bit quicker in that very microscopic view of programming for that period of time. But that's no different to this exact same choices you'd make as a coach if somebody is going from an extreme calorie deficit into a surplus. Their strength is going to go through the roof pretty quickly. Or if you're working with someone with newbie gains, if someone's brand new, their strength on paper in front of your eyes is just rapidly going up. So you as a coach, you don't just let that happen. You make changes to account for it, or you build in, okay, here's how we use RPE. This is how we rate a set, and I'm going to give you this RPE. So if the weight is too light, you can move it towards this RPE, or here's a range of weights to hit. Very similar when working with people on PEDs. A couple of things that become important with people on PEDs. So like, people say, well, they have increased recovery, therefore they can handle more work. It's kind of offset by the increase in strength. This increase in strength just counterbalances that increase in recovery. If anything, the increase in recovery can be a bit of a risk because you might feel good even though your body is not necessarily where it needs to be to maintain that level of volume or intensity. And that can then lend itself towards fatiguing too quick or running into an injury. But other things are, when you're running PEDs or when lifters are running PEDs, there's an increase in muscle tone, there's an increase in just water retention and general size. They tend to lose range of motion at joints. And this can become a risk for either injury or just like a change in performance if we're talking about competition lifts. If someone gets all big and bloated, all of a sudden they can't hit depth. What good is that if they're competing? Yeah, sure, they added 20 kilos to their squat, but it's high as fuck, who cares? You know, or people that run certain compounds will hold a lot of water, and if they hold it all in their hands and their shoulders, their ability to hold onto a barbell gets fucked. They keep dropping the barbell, all of a sudden their grip sucks. And it's like, yeah, sure, you added 40 kilos to your deadlift and straps, but if you can't hold onto the bar, what's the point? So there's a couple of bits and pieces that don't necessarily differ as much as require a slightly different approach. Like the fundamental training principles still apply. The main thing that changes is what I said before about lifters experiencing catabolism. That's going to happen less quick when you're on PEDs, but it's still going to happen.
Yeah, I think people have a lot of misconceptions with how training is going to differ on PEDs. And I've noticed personally just exactly what you're saying. Like my training from before and after really looks quite similar. It maybe sped up the process of getting stronger, of course, and then in turn needing to do a little bit less. But like I've had people ask me, like before I started, they were like, hey, so do you think when you start, you're going to have to like do way more training volume to make progress because your recovery is going to be way better? And I was like, man, if that's how that worked, I probably wouldn't be doing this. Like that would be very counterintuitive to actually making progress. I just suddenly had to work 10 times harder. And in reality, it was more so like maybe I recovered a tiny bit better at first, but after a little bit, you're stronger. And so you just kind of need to do less anyway, precisely with what you're saying.
Yeah, when you zoom out, and I mean, this is a good thing for anyone who is unfamiliar with PEDs to hear. When you zoom out and look at things on average over time, right? So if you were to map out the lifetime of progress, the rate of progress for the person on PEDs is going to be greater than the natty person. But if you start to zoom in and look at it in microsections, it's like the relative rate of progress for someone on PEDs is pretty much the same as someone who's natty. It's just been bumped up a level. So like you introduce PEDs for someone, you kind of get, I'm just going to make up a number, like a 10% boost. That will happen pretty rapidly. Let's say it happens in the first couple of months. Assuming that person stays on that dose of PEDs ongoing, the rate of progress then stabilizes and is pretty similar in rate of progress to someone who's natty following a very similar training protocol. If you had the shadow version of this person side by side, it would look pretty similar. So while the average over time is greater, the same hurdles, humps, difficulties, principles all kind of apply.
Yep, totally. I think that is where people have a big misconception in particular, where you kind of have to zoom out and look at the drug-induced gains and the training-induced gains a little bit differently, where you get that boost and then you're back to the training-induced gains solely and the training-induced rate. And even back to training styles, like when I was squatting 585, which is like 265 kilos naturally, and then fast forward months later, I was doing 675, which is 305 kilos. My training, if I got there sooner from PEDs for sure, but I sure hope that's not the last PR I ever hit. And if I just up squatting 800, I think we can say I would have done the 675 if I never touched a drug. But the 675 natural and the 675 enhanced, the training would probably look pretty darn identical. I just got to that training advancement and those training numbers quicker from that boost, like you were talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. There's an interesting psychology that comes with working with people on PEDs as well, because it's not like there or not there. You know, there's dose dependency, and the training will change, and the numbers changes quite dramatically, and there's a new level of psychological coaching that comes with it. And what I mean by this in English is, like, if you have a lifter that peaks for a competition on PEDs and squats 800, their training numbers, once they return to the developmental sort of phases of training, not on peaking PEDs, are going to be significantly less than their 800 squat would suggest. And they have to deal with the psychology of, I was superhuman a few months ago and now I'm not. And now the weights that were really easy while I was peaking are hard and work. It's a bit of a mindfuck, and it throws a lot of people out pretty quickly. And the danger with that, with particularly young people who aren't mature enough to handle that, is that then they go harder and harder and harder on drugs. And they're the people who we see as young people coming in and blasting drugs and going off the fucking face of the planet after 2 years of being super elite. And I think people probably look at someone like Colton like that. Listen to the Mark Bell podcast that he did recently, because he explained the protocols that he is using. And I can tell you from a lot of experience working with people on performance enhancing drugs, that relative to that world, he takes next to nothing, which only speaks to how freaky the kid is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good podcast. I listen to it myself personally. I think a lot of the times, obviously drugs help, but if you're chasing the dosage thing and just going higher and higher, you're going to run into some pretty strong diminishing returns. We're just
absolutely,
you can't run 8 grams and then expect to get more out of 20 grams. Like, you don't have, like, first of all, you're going to die. Second of all, you can't put that in your muscles. Like, it's just not going to fit. But also, it's really easy to run into side effects if you go too high, you pick the wrong compounds. Like, if you're not sleeping at all at night, you're not getting stronger. Like, you could have the perfect programming, perfect nutrition. You're going to get weaker and you're going to get injured. Talking from experience, it's just not going to add up. Do you think, I guess this is going to vary a lot. There are some guys super strong that are natural, and there are some guys that try to push 5 grams and it probably doesn't go too well. But among the elite lifters you see, is there kind of a dosage range that you would tell someone, like, hey, if you're going above this, like, you're probably making a mistake? Like, Colton Engelbrecht isn't on 4 grams of gear. If you are, maybe pull it back. Yeah.
No, and I mean, he's again, it's not my place to get into specifics with it, but he's on much less than 1 gram. So the typical performance dosing it depends on your school of thought. I'm going to be the first to say I'm not an expert on PEDs, so like I can't speak too in depth on it. But if you listen to people like Broderick Chavez, Evil Genius, that kind of thing, their performance dosing is somewhere between 10 and 20 milligrams per kilogram. And I mean, 20 milligrams per kilogram is a lot. 100 kilo male doing 2 grams is a lot. To me, that's heaps. I'm very much a less is more when I talk to people about that side of things as well. So yeah, I would say if you're pushing above 10 milligrams per kilogram and you are not the absolute best of the best, you really need to rethink what you're doing. Because it's like, again, I'm a big believer in zooming out and looking at the whole picture. It's like, why are you doing this? What are you doing now? What is the cost of this? How's this affecting you psychologically, mentally? How's it affecting your body? And I mean, the reality is drugs don't win competitions. It's what you just said, the training, the nutrition, the sleep. And you are 100% right about the fact that there is a point of diminishing returns. The amount of people I've seen pump drugs, ruin their sleep, ruin their appetite, and then perform like shit and be like, I don't get it, I was taking so much. I'm like, that's why you performed like shit. Like, you literally did terribly because of the drugs that you were taking. They should very much be looked at, with a high degree of respect, but also from a supplemental lens. They're to supplement and to enhance your performance, which means they need to complement all the things that make for good performance.
Yep, exactly. Trying to explain that to someone naturally sometimes is a bit difficult. They're like, so you're on X and you're getting weaker? And I'm like, yes, like, trust me, like, that was not a good idea. The 10, what would you say, the 10 milligrams per kilo of body weight, okay. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I think I heard him say that as well. I think that's a good metric too. Like, if you're going from 10 to 20, that might be worth it if you're the person beating Colton, sure. But like, there's not going to be some magic that happens between that range either, where you go from a mediocre lifter totaling 1,400 to 2,000. If you're doing the 10 times, like, if you weren't a good lifter naturally, it's probably not in the cards, for matter of fact.
Yeah, and my personal opinion on that, because that number I'm parroting from somebody else. Mm-hmm. My personal opinion on that is that 10 milligrams per kilogram, which for some people is the starting performance dose, to me, that's extremely high. I think that's very high. Like, if people ask my advice on this, I would give much less than that, like 3 to 5 as a performance dose, not a cruising dose.
Yeah. No, I would too. I've personally noticed, so I'm one of the people that actually, like, genuinely had low testosterone naturally. I know everyone just loves to say that, but this is the lack of my defense. This is actually against me. I didn't know that. I always suspected it. I didn't know that until I started. And so I got my blood work done beforehand, which is smart, but I was like, I don't even want to know. Like, I think I have low test. Like, it's going to mentally hinder me when I'm training naturally. I just don't even want to know. And I got it tested. I started testosterone, and then my results came back like 2 days later, and my test was 136. So, like, super, super crappy. Couldn't grow facial hair or anything. And but regardless, because of that, I think that 10 times number, that's like the cap of what I even noticed progress out of. So for me, that's like 7, maybe 800 milligrams. Because a lot of times people with low testosterone, they don't have as many androgen receptors. So if I try the 20 times number, for me, that's like 1.5, almost 2 grams. And like, I will just start losing hair like absolutely crazy. Get side effects.
Feel like shit.
Yeah, you do. You just feel like shit and have so many side effects, and you are not going to get stronger. You're either going to stay the same or literally regress. It's just negative.
My favorite thing is the TRT. Like, I'm on a TRT dose. I'm like, cool. How much does the human body make? Like, what are you actually replacing? Oh, I don't know. I'm on 250 a week. I'm like, that's like more than triple the TRT dose. That's like, imagine triple dosing anything. Imagine you do 10,000 steps a day and you triple dose at 30,000 steps a day. That is a very, very, very different experience. And so this is the thing with drugs, especially. Like, when people are like, oh, I'm on this and now I'm going to take this and it's double. It's like, do you fathom what double means? Like, What's double your squat max? Go squat that next week. You can't, because it's double. That is a lot. It doesn't sound like a lot when you look at, oh, I'll just take, ibuprofen. I'll just take 2 instead of 1. You don't think about it like that, but you should. You should really consider, like, what is doubling something or 1.5xing something actually mean?
Yeah, definitely. If you want an extreme case of that, I just keep referencing myself for just dumb examples. But when I started, my test was 136, and I was just like, we're starting 500 milligrams. I'm a bro. What else do you do? That's just what you start with. And in hindsight, I'm like, I could have started with like 100 milligrams, which puts me at around like 600, and I would have been in normal range. That's a huge spike already. Regardless, I 25x'd my natural to enhanced dose, and like 2/3 of that probably was not really even helping that much, because even if you're on a ton, like, you can only progress so fast. Like, maybe you could have that card later, but I'm alive to tell the tale, and I've become intelligent with those things now, fortunately.
Here's a fun thought experiment, or not even. Here's a fun experiment for anyone to watch, because information on PEDs is so sparse and only really becoming less taboo to talk about these days. Go into ChatGPT and ask it to write you a cycle, because it's scrubbing the internet from data and forums and shit from like 20 years ago. So you'll get the most ridiculous old school bro science cycle that you've ever seen. It's so funny. Anyway,
it's even worse if you ask it to design a cycle and then be like, how much am I going to bench after the cycle? And it's like, a moderate result would be 200 pounds on your bench. And you're like, I just get an average response. This is going to be sick. Which, speaking of, the last PED question I really had is, people have a ton of misconceptions about how much PEDs help relative strength. Obviously, it has to be in a weight class. If you're talking absolute strength, like if you go from 200 pounds to 300 pounds and you're natural, you're going to get a hell of a lot stronger. If you're doing PEDs as well, it's kind of a weight gain versus PEDs versus training, all those things help, but they're kind of individual components, even though they play into each other. I think what people mean to say is, if you're in a heavier weight class, you can put on more muscle. They can help more heavier weight classes, which is true. But since you have experience, you have much more experience with athletes on PEDs. Do you have just like is the 10% number that people throw around kind of accurate? Is it 20%? Is it 5%?
Yeah, I mean, it's so complex. It's as much as I want to say, 10%. If you held a gun to my head and said, give me an average, I'd probably throw out 10%. Which, look at a total. If someone is totaling 900 naturally and they can add 10%, total 990, I'm talking kilos, then, I mean, that is a very, very significant improvement on the total. But it's so relative to so many things. It's like, well, what's the genetic potential? But really, more than anything, is remembering that the gear in and of itself doesn't magically make you stronger. I mean, you could argue that there's some degree of, that increase in testosterone providing some level of strength for sure, but it's the training that makes you stronger, right? And I think it's so dependent on the individual's capacity to then look at it in that framework. Is the person taking gear and then trying to rely on it, or are they taking gear and being like, okay, now I'm putting my body on the line, I'm taking risk, I'm putting this thing in my body, I better fucking think about my nutrition, my sleep, my training quality, the work that I'm doing to keep my body healthy. And a lot of people will have a rapid improvement in strength that could be more attributed to the fact that they're training better and focusing on recovery protocols than just taking the drugs. But then you've got the other added complication and confounding factors of what drugs are they taking, how much, how's that dose changing, what are they stacking on top of it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not as simple as like, are you wearing ins and knee sleeves or not? It's not one thing there or one thing not. There's a lot more to it. So as much as I want to give a very straightforward answer, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many variables, but for the most part, I'd agree. Like 10, I'd even say like maybe 15%, but people like to think it helps a ton. If you're getting 10 or 15 and you're already strong, that is 100, 150 kilos in your total. Maybe if you're getting 150 kilos, that's off of 1,000 kilo total, and that's 15%. If someone's like a really, really good responder, like someone like Pete Rubish, I think that's what he says he got about. And that's massive. That's 100 pounds on each lift. But I think everyone, including myself, like I had the idea when I went into it, I was like, dude, this John Hack Jr. right here, give me a year, John Hack Jr. And you go down the pipeline that we've talked about of, oh, okay, I'm going to do that. And it's going to be the answer. And then you start and you go, okay, it must be like the different drugs and the higher doses. And then you try that and you're like, actually, I think it's more so genetics and training. You come back to that in the process, and it's a little disappointing, but you're also a lot stronger. And from learning that, you also learn, dialing in the training and all those other variables. I actually can progress this a lot farther than I originally thought. And you don't have to use that as a crutch as much, be much healthier, that sort of thing.
And what most people will find is that if you look at someone like Hack, and I can't speak to John Hack's cycles or anything like that, but someone who was prolific in a drug testers federation that then jumped on and then became a long-standing prolific lifter in a untested federation was probably taking significantly less than that 10 to 20 milligrams thing I was speaking about before. Maybe they ramped it up over the years as they got more confident and more competent and confident with the use of those drugs. But I guarantee they were very conservative for a very long time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he already had such a good base with his training. I don't think he'd feel the need to just jump into something crazy, just kind of moderate, keep progress going a little longer. That's the thing too. I've seen you talk about this in your story. I know we only got a minute left, so I'll wrap it up, but this is just a personal gripe. I don't know if you have this too, but I agree. I absolutely think there are a lot of lifters in the IPF that are natural, 100%. Of course, there's some cheating, but like people really can get super, super strong naturally, 100%. But it just drives me nuts. And people have that thought. And then they also think that like, if you're an IPF lifter and you hop on drugs, like you're going to get this crazy 50% strength boost. And like, no one's going to have heard of Colton Engelbrecht. Like if they did drugs, if the top 100 people in tested did drugs, it would just blow everything out of the water. And, Colton and these untested lifters, they'd be nothing. That just drives me nuts. Like you can't think both things. Drugs are very helpful, but not as helpful as you'd wish.
I mean, I must admit, I live in a very, very, very small bubble. Like I don't pay a lot of attention to the chatter of the powerlifting world. Maybe that's at my detriment. I don't know. So I personally haven't seen a great deal of that. But yeah, I mean, it's just not that simple. Now that said, fuck, it would be cool to see what Jesus would do if he started blasting gear, but like who knows? You jump on gear, and maybe then you blow up your knee and you never powerlift again. It's an impossible thought experiment to play around with.
Yep, exactly. You'll never know. Last question I like to end it off with for people is just if you have like one piece of advice that you could give to athletes and things they commonly come to you with and they're making mistakes, what would that piece of advice be? For instance, some other people will say, you're overshooting your RIR too often, or you're not pushing your accessories hard enough. What's just one common thing that people can take home and work on?
You're probably not pushing your main lift hard enough.
Okay, I like it.
Powerlifting, we have been sold this lie for so many years that you're always meant to walk away from your SPD feeling good with plenty in the tank. Bullshit. Train harder. And doing a squat to a true 2 RIR is way harder than doing the leg press to a true 2 RIR. So yeah, train harder. And I mean on the actual training, your top double for the week, that's not doing shit. That's not making you bigger or stronger. I mean on the volume work that you're doing, that should be hard as hell.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is a great podcast. Do you want to tell people where they can find you for socials, coaching, anything?
Sure, man. Well, thank you so much again for having me and taking the time to chat this morning. You can follow 0_weakness. That's the brand. Me personally, I'm TomBro7 on Instagram. Either of those is a great way to see everything we do and everything we are doing. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.